Now let's talk about minifying your JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. You can see that as these three options. And essentially when I expand these, they're going to show them to you. And like it's for a smaller site, you see the size is not that big. As your site gets bigger, you see we can take a look at the CSS, and you can see that it's also not a lot of size here. And then we can look at the HTML, and it's also not tremendous here, right? You can see the size and the size, reductions and all that. So it's you win a little bit, and that's fantastic. So every little win is great. Your site will load faster with every single little win. And it's ultimately up to you how much time you want to spend on this. If you don't care about like extra milliseconds, you really just have to identify the biggest problem areas in this list and take care of them. And so that will optimize. Basically, you're going to spend the least amount of time for the most amount of effort. But long term, generally, you want to make sure that every single detail, that every single advantage you can get, you should take if you can get it. And so for that reason, it's not a bad idea to go through this and optimize this. Now, there are a number of like HTML minifiers and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript minifiers. I'll show you kind of how they work. Here's an example of an HTML minifier. It's you can see the URL here, kangax.github.io/html-minifier. And what you'll see on the right side is all the options for it. And basically the way these things work, and essentially the way they work for HTML and CSS and JavaScript, is that they'll get rid of, you see, this is the before. I entered this page of mine from before, and this is the after, okay? And what really happened is that it took all my code and it took out a lot of white space, because you can see there's like collapse white space. You see that? That's one of the options I chose. And you can read through it. This is a relatively advanced minifier, and there's a whole bunch of other options that it gives you. Some you can take, some you can neglect. But the biggest savings is getting rid of the space, because look on the top part, look how much space I was using, and it's essentially, like there's a lot of white space to get rid of. So that's what I ended up doing, and it shows you the savings. So original size was this, and I reduced the size by almost 50%, which is pretty good. And you can do this for all of your JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Now, here's the thing. The HTML above, that's how my code looks like when I edit it. And it's very easy to edit. Now, granted, of course, that you know how to edit code. Now, the problem with this stuff on the bottom here is that this is almost unreadable and almost uneditable by a human. So how do you resolve this? Like, how do you actually use it? So what really happens is all the editing and testing and everything will be with code like this in your code base. Once you're done editing and once you're done testing, you should have a final folder, some call it like the build folder, where you're going to have the final versions of your HTML, your CSS, and they're going to look like the bottom area. They're going to save you space. They're going to be, the code functions the same, but it's just not readable by humans. So your server will just appreciate this because it's easier for it to process, will be faster. But for you, you'll be always editing this. And essentially, as far as your computer is concerned, they're identical. But as far as you're concerned, of course, it's easier for you to read and edit the top one. So you're always going to read and edit the top one, but the thing that's going to get served up on your website is going to be the bottom one, and it's always going to be a little faster, and it's easy to manage as long as you keep a build folder for your finalized versions of your pages. And that's the easy way to mitigate both the editing, the readability, and the load speed of this code.